guess I don't really think about being the dot queen. It was given to me very early on in my bead career. In 1993, the Society of Glass Bead Makers, now it's the International Society of Glass Bead Makers, had an exhibition in Prescott, Arizona. And a collection of people who made beads went to this. There were about 80 of us. And at that time, you could pretty much go around and see in the United States everybody who was making contemporary glass beads, and you can identify them by their style. Now there's hundreds and hundreds of people making beads, so it's difficult to say what everybody's style is. But at that time, I was looked upon, and I was the dot queen, because I was the one making the most dots on my beads. And that name stuck throughout the years. Though there are many people who are putting dots on their beads, I ended up being the queen.
Welcome to the Corning Museum of Glass. My name is David Whitehouse, and I'm the Executive Director of the museum. One of the jewels in the museum's crown is the studio, a teaching facility where we help people to improve the ways they make glass. One of the ways we do this at the studio is to produce a series of masterclass videos. The latest in our series, it's number 7, stars Kristina Logan, the leading maker of glass beads working today. Kristina is the heir to a very long tradition. After all, people have been making beads since the Stone Age. Stone beads, shell beads, more recently, glass beads. Glass, in fact, has a 4,000-year-plus history. The very earliest glass beads in our collection are not quite as old as that, but this pendant, for example, was made 3,500 years ago. These beads are rather more recent. They were made a mere 2,500 years ago. Fast forward to the present day, and in this video, watch Kristina create some of the most spectacular and exciting and beautiful beads being made today.
There are many kinds of beads. There are small beads and large beads and long beads, round beads. I started off when I first started making beads, making small beads, because that's all I could handle. That's as much glass as I could control around a mandrel on the flame. And I have still, to this day, continued to make small beads. And whether or not that is for production or for making into a piece of jewelry, making those small beads is something that I've consistently done. And the nice part about it is that it trains my hands. So by making those beads one after another, it really teaches you how the glass moves. It's like an exercise in practice. So that through all that practice, when it comes time to working with a larger piece of glass or a larger bead, hopefully your hands have been prepared. They have been practiced and they're ready to work with a larger piece of glass. So I never deter, I never turn away from the idea of production or smaller beads, because it all serves the greater purpose of having your hands ready to work with this molten material. All the mandrels that I use are made out of stainless steel. The steel doesn't conduct heat very well, so it's fabulous for holding them in your hand and getting one end red hot where the bead and the glass is going to be attached. The larger mandrels create beads with large holes. They're a little bit more difficult to keep the glass even all the way around it than a smaller or thinner mandrel, because that way you can use gravity a lot more. When I'm working with a bead that's on a large mandrel that will have a large hole, then I have to marver a lot more. So I have to use that little graphite paddle and push the glass a lot more in order to push it into the shape that I want. So there's a lot more manipulation that goes on and a lot more heat. You know, I need to really turn up my torch and push the heat into the bead. But then at the same time, if I'm going to be doing details and dots on the surface or any kind of pattern, then I have to turn the flame down in order to keep those details really precise. So there's a little bit of a give and take that happens. And then with that disc shape, it's not necessarily a natural shape for the glass to fall into or melt into. So you really have to push it into that shape. So there's a lot of conscious manipulation that goes on. So sometimes I'll take a glass rod and I will fold it in half and then attach that to another single glass rod so it almost looks like a giant tuning fork, and then put that into the kiln. And that is simply to allow me to gather more glass, hot glass, molten glass, when I'm trying to make a larger bead. Instead of using that thin diameter rod, I now have two rods that are stuck together. So it's a little bit quicker. You know, it gets me to my end result in a more efficient way. So that's just simply what I have been doing lately. It's one of the joys I have about being in the studio alone and working, is that feeling of time either standing still or just it disappearing in a way into a void. And I get that feeling when I'm working on patterns. I love patterns, so my eye is always drawn to them wherever I'm looking. And then I find that when I become involved in making a pattern or working on my own work, even if it's polishing something or sanding something, the rhythm of my breathing and my body and my movements to my hands all seem to get synchronized. And it's the closest way I can feel that my body gets towards meditation. So it's like meditation in movement. I have a dedicated yoga practice, and it is very much like that, where your movement and your breath are very connected to your mind at the same time. And it's not as if when I'm making these dots, I'm feeling like, oh, I can't wait until they're done, or I'm counting them, or I'm angry because they're not spaced correctly. It is this lack of thought in a way, and this being lost in that moment. So I try very hard to, as I'm putting a dot down, to just be putting that dot down. And so that when I go to my next one, I am just putting that dot down. So it keeps me very much in the moment of it happening, and it's a great feeling. When I'm working on the torch, my approach to the glass is pretty slow. I'm not a very fast bead maker, and it's almost the concept of the tortoise and the hare, where I get there slowly with not a lot of movements, but I eventually get there. It's the way that I hold the tools that feels good to me. It's almost like the yoga practice, where the hand and the eye and the breath and the movement is all connected. So when I pick up a marver, I'm picking it up pretty lightly and maneuvering the glass in as much ease as I can find, in the fewest movements as possible. Oftentimes I will decorate one side differently than the other side. So I might do the same physical pattern, so I might put the same amount of physical dots on it and the same kind of tool by dragging and poking, but I might change my colors from one side to the other. And all these colors react differently. Some of the opaques will receive the transparent dots differently. Some will eat them, some will creep around the sides, some will stay right exactly where you know they'll be, and some will move. So I like to decorate both sides differently, so then I can choose which side I want to keep and which side I want to grind off as far as the jewelry goes. After I make all my beads, I put them into an annealing oven. And depending on the type of glass that I'm using depends on the temperature of the oven. It's usually around 950 degrees Fahrenheit. And the beads will be put in there. If I'm working all day, I'll keep the annealer up at that temperature all day, keep on putting my beads in there, and at the end of the day, cycle that temperature down so that in the morning my beads will be cold and I'll be able to take them out of the kiln. When I'm making the bead, sometimes I will decide when it's in the flame which side I like better, but it's not always the case when I pull the bead out of the kiln and I really get to see it when it's cold and all those colors come back to their true form. I can tell which side that I like. If the bead is really nice on both sides, then I'll leave it as a bead and somebody will buy it and they'll be very happy. The feedback I've had is that oftentimes people are really happy to have a bead that has a different color on either side because it almost gives them two to be able to look at one side and then the other side. Sometimes if one side really doesn't come out the way I want it, then I'm happy to grind it off. On a diamond wheel, with water, I will grind off so the wheel spins and then I can rub my glass bead up and down, just a really fine grit, then I can just grind a little bit. And I'll grind the backs, what I call the back of my bead, in order to give me just a flat spot so then I can set it as if it were a stone into a piece of jewelry. And I'll do that for my rings, and I'll do it for brooches, and I'll do it for necklaces. I don't have earrings right now that I grind. I keep the beads completely whole for earrings right now. I think when you think about beads as being used for jewelry, often you think about stringing beads. Taking beads, putting them on a string, tying the knot around the string, and then putting them over your head. That's as simple as it gets. Whether or not those beads are knotted in between, you put a bead on the string, you make a knot, you put a bead on the string, you make a knot, you put a bead on the string. Or whether or not you just string them all together and put one big knot on them. Kind of like a rosary. That is one way of putting the beads together for jewelry. I am trying to challenge that technique, though the beads around my neck are strung that way, with knots in between like a string of pearls. I'm often trying to think about how to connect the beads with metal and with silver in a way that's non-traditional, so that it counteracts that idea of stringing. So cutting the beads, drilling them, putting rivets in them, setting them like a stone, like bezels, and then tapping and dyeing and screwing parts together. So that's the way I like to approach most of my jewelry making, is cutting things up and acting like they are not necessarily beads. I do all my own silversmithing, and early on when I started making beads, I had no intention of being a silversmith. Didn't even occur to me. I started to want to make jewelry. So my first idea was to ask a friend of mine who was a jeweler if she would help me make the jewelry. So for a while we made work together. It was collaborative. And then she went on vacation and I needed to make some pieces for a gallery. And I called her up and she couldn't help me, but she told me how to do it myself. So I started to do it myself. My mother is also a metalsmith, and I have some dear friends who are metalsmiths. So with their guidance and help, I just forged ahead. And I realized, I don't want to say it wasn't difficult, because there are things that are very difficult about metalsmithing, but it was straightforward enough, the things that I wanted to do, that I could do them myself, and that I enjoyed them. And it takes time, and the beads are so quick. I like the two together. I do really love doing the metal parts and all the aspects of it. I like that feeling of being self-reliant in the studio, being able to figure things out on my own. And once I have a lot of elements, including beads, then I start the drawing process. And the drawing process can be either drawings, like this one, where I've included the chain, which I'm following pretty clearly here, or they can be what I call physical drawings, where I'm not actually drawing in 2 dimensions, but I'm keeping them in 3 dimensions. So I do a lot of that work in the studio, where I take elements, like this piece of flat sheet that I cut out, and I'll set that underneath a bead and then physically look at it. So instead of a drawing, I can see what it would potentially look like if I turned it into a brooch. So then I just start laying things on top of each other, the beads, and I'll flip the bead on either side to see which side I like better, and then lay it down and look at it. And I'm doing this as a process in the studio that usually takes a couple days. You know, sometimes I can make a decision immediately, like I'll know that that's a brooch that I want to make and I'll leave that, or sometimes I let them float for a couple days and make changes as I go. And this is the bead that I really want to make into a pendant. And then I have a ring for the center of it and a ring for the exterior. Once I make the decision of what I want to do, then it's just sitting down and physically putting all the pieces together and doing all the metal work and the soldering and the cleanup. But this thought process is the part that I really enjoy. So that one right there, I like very much. I think the reception has been quite good for objects. You know, people who are interested in beads and jewelry will always be interested in beads and jewelry, but I like to cross over. You know, my idea for the future is I would like to combine more materials. Like, I like the idea of the metal and the glass, so sort of crossing materials a little bit, which I hope to be able to continue to do. I think I'm always going to go back to things that relate to the human figure. That's a place that I feel really comfortable working in. So I like to feel like I'll have both hands, you know? One hand with work that stays on the human figure, and another hand that has work that will become objects in a more abstract way. When a student first begins to make glass beads, it's an incredibly exciting time. You know, melting glass on your own without any assistance, and then wrapping it around a mandrel and seeing a bead instantly made in front of your eyes. It's empowering, it's exciting, it's just thrilling. And as a teacher, it's thrilling to be around a student who is that excited. And then oftentimes what happens is the student will understand what's happening and be able to see these demonstrations and know how the glass works. But their own hands might not be able to do it yet. So in the learning curve, sometimes there's this wall of frustration that a student might come to. I still come to it myself, and it just depends on where one's personal wall is, where you know how to do it in your mind, but your hands can't do it yet. And that just takes time. It takes time and perseverance to work through it, and the idea of working every single day or working on small beads and preparing your hands, because it is a craft. It is something that you need to work at diligently in order to get your hands to work the way your head wants them to. Teaching here at the studio is wonderful because all the elements are in place. Not only do you have the library and the museum right next door, which is a perfect combination of all these elements for learning. So not only are you learning on a technical level, but you have access to the museum, and it allows them to look at glass on a larger scale. It's nice to be able to see how beads in particular fit along the history and along the timeline of glass through the ages. It's nice to be able to see the different ways glass is used and have the students think about their work and how they want to use it in a different way. When I see these beads, it reminds me of the beads that I see in my travels through bead societies and bead shows, and it's exciting to be able to see them here in the museum.
Well, it's exciting to be able to display them, and one of the reasons we display them is that it's not only people like you who are great travelers. Beads historically have been great travelers. All of these beads were made in Europe, many of them in the 19th century, a few a little bit earlier, but many of them have been actually collected in the field in places like West Africa, because beads were exported in huge numbers all over the world out of Europe from the 17th century onwards.
So in this case, what I find exciting is not only the beads, but now beads being used as objects. And then these two objects, the beads were obviously made for the human form because they're hats, but unto themselves, the objects are just beautiful.
I love this one with the birds on it and then this finial on the top. Yeah, they're made as objects, but they're made as special objects. They're not hats that you and I would wear for everyday use. They're ceremonial hats. And I'm really intrigued by the idea that a bead maker might produce hundreds of thousands of beads without ever realizing that some of those beads at their destination would be turned into significant cultural or ritual objects.
Exactly. So they have that energy in them where the bead unto itself might have its beginnings in a very modest way, maybe at the torch or a lamp or in a furnace, and then they get used in a way that becomes very important to the culture that they're in.
Absolutely. Now, there's another aspect of the beads in this case that really intrigues me, and that is, unless I'm wrong, some of these beads are the earliest pieces of glass made in Africa south of the Sahara. And many of them, we believe, were made by taking beads imported from Europe or bottles imported from Europe, crushing them up, remelting them, and making beads that are very distinctively West African in style, that were just what the West African people wanted to decorate themselves with.
So they were using beads in order to make beads. These right here, they're the colors of some of the beads that we see coming from Venice.
Right. There are a million stories, and they're not only bead stories, they're anthropological stories as well.
They become human stories.
Absolutely. You've got it. Yeah.
One of my favorite collection of beads that I have are not even glass, they're granite. They're these beautiful long bicones that are incredibly ancient with these hand-drilled holes. And these holes, which you can only imagine took such a long time to drill, have wear marks. They're not even round anymore. The holes have, they're oblong, and they're worn from whoever was wearing that bead for years and arguably centuries. That bead has been worn on people's skin. So in my mind, I can feel that. I feel the energy off of a bead that has been worn for that long. There's something palpable. There's lifetimes of people who have touched these objects that I think gives the object energy. And I find that really inspirational. When I was in school studying sculpture and fine arts and drawing from the figure, I really was not interested in color. I claimed to be afraid of it. I didn't think I understood it. I thought there was maybe something to understand about color that I wasn't let in on, the concept. So I veered away from it. And then when I saw somebody flame working, I don't think I was really interested in the color. It was more the movement and the fluidity of melting glass by yourself that was interesting to me. I started making beads first on the that was the first thing that I made. I got a torch, I set up, I got a mandrel in my hand, and I started making beads. And I don't know why. It was just this instant desire to make tiny little beads. I think it related back to my mother's jewelry box. She has a strand of beads, and they're little fruit, and they're made out of glass, and I remember these. It was just freedom and fun. There was some sort of primitive connection that I had to beads, that's what I wanted to make, that's what I wanted to flame work. How do I get my ideas? Sometimes, rarely, my ideas will come when I'm not looking for them. For instance, at 3:30 in the morning, or at times when I'm walking down the street. I'll be struck by an idea. But 99% of the time, my ideas come when I'm in the studio and when I'm working. So I'm very diligent about my working in the studio. I am very dedicated and determined to work constantly. And it's that constant pattern of work that I believe brings ideas. If, for instance, if I have a goal or a expo or something that's going to happen in 3 months and I need to prepare for it, I will start really early on in month number 1, and I will work slowly in the studio. And I keep on working that way. And the closer and the closer I get to my deadline, the more and more the ideas come. And it's like this concentration of energy that happens, and the energy becomes compacted and the ideas become richer and more dense right at that period before that deadline happens. And I believe that I can't have that kind of concentration of frenetic, creative energy without having all that work that leads up to it. So when you have at that point where that energy is really tight and you have all those ideas and you're really working hard and everything's going great in the studio, if you didn't have all that preparation in advance for it and all that work leading up to it, you wouldn't be prepared to put into action those ideas. At 3 in the morning, if you have an idea, you're not sitting there in your studio ready for action. So I believe in that preparation. I believe in that hard work. It's how I approach the work that I make. The bead, I'd like to call them bead people. The bead people are passionate about beads. And whether or not it be contemporary glass beads or historic beads, there's this, I believe, really primal connection people have with beads and how they're worn on the body. They've been used as money. They have been used as a part of a spiritual practice, as prayer beads for many different religions. And they've been used for trade, to get other objects. Let's trade beads. So there's this long lineage that goes with the cultures of the world. And right now, the contemporary glass bead movement, we don't need it for money. We use money in a different way. We don't trade beads anymore, though I've traded beads for many different things. So I don't know, maybe there's a spiritual quality to it that doesn't relate to a particular religion, that brings people together on a heart level. That means a lot to me.